Okay, let's really get into this. Imagine you've just won your freedom, right? Fought a revolution. Now what? How do you actually build a government that works for the people, but, doesn't become the very thing you fought against?
That was exactly the massive challenge facing the brand new United States back in the late 1700s. And well, the answer, or at least a huge part of it, came through these incredible essays, the Federalist Papers.
Yeah, and today we're doing a deep dive. We're pulling from Sean Armstrong's Consent of the Governed and the actual Federalist Papers book.pdf.
Our goal really is to unpack the arguments, the thinking behind the U.S. Constitution, and honestly see how much of it still hits home today.
Get ready for some surprising ideas, maybe even a few aha moments along the way. So first things first, why were the Federalist Papers even necessary? To get that, you have to picture the U.S. right after the Revolutionary War. Things were shaky.
Oh, incredibly shaky. Their first shot at a government, the Articles of Confederation, well, it turned out to be, frankly, a bit of a disaster.
How so? What were the main problems?
Well, for starters, the central government had almost no real power. It couldn't tax at all.
Wow. How does a government function without taxing?
It doesn't, really. Couldn't pay its debts, couldn't fund an army, which was a huge problem. Remember Shays' Rebellion in '86?
Yeah, farmers protesting, economic chaos.
Exactly. And the national government was basically helpless. It also couldn't regulate trade between the states. So you had states acting like, little economic rivals.
So not exactly united.
Not at all. It was a very loose confederation. And maybe the biggest flaw, changing the Articles required unanimous agreement from all 13 states.
13 out of 13, that sounds impossible.
Pretty much was. It meant the system couldn't adapt. It was grinding to a halt, a real crisis.
Okay, so the articles are failing. Who steps up?
That's where Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay come in. They saw the danger, the potential collapse of the whole American experiment.
So they decide to write something.
Right. Under a shared pen name, Publius, they wrote 85 essays between 1787 and 1788. These became the Federalist Papers. Their mission: convince people, especially in key states like New York, to ratify the new Constitution that had been drafted.
And this ratification wasn't a sure thing, was it? I mean, the Constitution was approved by the convention in September '87, but that wasn't the end of it.
Not by a long shot. It needed 9 of the 13 states to actually approve it to take effect. And that kicked off this massive, intense debate across the country.
The Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists.
Exactly. The Anti-Federalists, writing under names like Cato and Brutus, were deeply suspicious. They feared this new constitution created a central government that was too powerful.
What were their specific worries?
They worried it would crush states' rights, trample on individual liberties. A big thing for them was the lack of a Bill of Rights, no explicit list of what the government couldn't do to citizens.
Which seems like a reasonable concern, right?
Absolutely. And the Federalist Papers were written directly to answer those concerns. They were a point-by-point defense of the Constitution, arguing for a government that was strong, yes, but also carefully balanced to protect freedom.
And eventually, they succeeded.
They did. Their arguments were incredibly influential. New Hampshire became the crucial 9th state to ratify in June 1788, and the Constitution became the law of the land.
Okay, let's dig into some of the core ideas, the philosophy behind it all. Federalist number 1, Hamilton starts things off with a pretty profound question, doesn't he?
He really does. He asks, essentially, can human societies actually create good government through reflection and choice? Or are we just doomed to have our governments shaped by accident and force, like, conquest or inheritance?
It's a fundamental question about human capability.
Totally. He's contrasting this idea of deliberate, reasoned government building with tyranny, which Aristotle defined as ruling through coercion. Legitimate government, Hamilton insists, has to be built on the consent of the people.
And he felt America had a unique chance to prove this.
He felt the world was watching. America's conduct and example, he said, would show whether self-governance was even possible. High stakes.
And then John Jay, in Federalist number 2, talks about why America was maybe uniquely suited for this experiment in unity.
Yet Jay makes this interesting case that America wasn't just a random collection of colonies. He points to things like a shared culture, language, religion, similar political ideas, and crucially, the shared experience of the revolution fighting side by side.
So a foundation was already there, he argued.
Right. He saw these common threads as a huge advantage for building a unified nation, something maybe missing elsewhere.
Then in Federalist number 9, Hamilton talks about the science of politics improving. What did he mean by that? It sounds almost like an engineering approach.
Well, In a way. He argued that political thinking had advanced. We learned things. He lists these new discoveries or improvements like separating powers into distinct branches, legislative, executive, judicial.
Okay, separation of powers. What else?
Things like legislative balances and checks. Think the House and Senate checking each other. Also, independent courts with judges serving during good behavior, meaning lifetime appointments, essentially.
So they wouldn't be swayed by political pressure.
Exactly.
Okay.
And critically, the idea of representation itself, having the people elect deputies to make laws, these weren't entirely new ideas, maybe, but Hamilton argued they could now be combined into a more stable Republican system.
He also mentioned enlargement of the orbit. What's that about?
That's key. It connects to Madison's ideas, too. The thinking was that a larger republic with more diverse interests and factions would actually be more stable than a small one because it would be harder for any single group to take over.
Interesting. So diversity as a strength in a way.
In a political sense, yes. This unique American context, Enlightenment ideas, experience with self-rule in the colonies, a focus on individualism, even the geography, all seem to make it fertile ground for this new kind of republic.
But even with the best design, they knew they had to deal with, well, people. Human nature.
Absolutely. Which brings us straight to maybe the most famous essay, Federalist number 10, by James Madison, tackling the problem of factions.
How did he define a faction? Is it just like a political party?
Broader than that, really. He defined it as any group, majority or minority, united by a common interest that goes against the rights of others or the good of the whole community.
Okay, so it could be an economic group, a religious group, any kind of special interest.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. Madison famously says the causes of faction are sewn into the nature of man. Differences in opinion, passion, property, they're inevitable. We're wired for it.
So you can't just get rid of factions.
Nope. Trying to remove the causes would mean either destroying liberty, which is worse than the disease, he said, or somehow making everyone identical in their thoughts and interests, which is impossible.
So if you can't eliminate factions, what do you do?
You control their effects. That was
Fair.
Madison's genius insight. Through the structure of the government itself. First, representation. Electing representatives tends to refine or filter the raw public views. Second, and crucially, that extended republic idea again. In a large country with many competing factions, it's much harder for any single one to gain enough power to dominate everyone else. They kind of check each other.
So harness the conflict. Don't try to suppress it entirely.
Precisely. It's about managing human nature, not trying to perfect it, which leads right into another key Madisonian concept in Federalist 51.
Ah, the famous line, if men were angels, no government would be necessary.
That's the one. It perfectly captures the realism. We need government to control the people, yes, but we also need government to control itself.
And this is where the separation of powers and checks and balances really come into play, influenced by thinkers like Montesquieu.
Absolutely. Montesquieu stressed not concentrating power. Madison took that and ran with it, arguing for what he called making ambition, counteract ambition.
What does that mean in practice?
It means each branch, executive, legislative, judicial, needs to have its own will, its own power base, and importantly, the means and the motive to resist being encroached upon by the others.
So it's not enough just to write down separate powers on paper?
No. Madison explicitly warned against relying on apportionment barriers. He knew that wouldn't be enough. You need the branches to have overlapping powers, ways to actually check each other, like the presidential veto or the Senate confirming appointments.
He seemed particularly worried about one branch overreaching.
Yes, the legislative branch. Because it holds the power of the purse and makes the laws, he saw it as potentially the most powerful and dangerous. So dividing it into the House and Senate was another check within that branch.
And this layered system with state governments, too, provides a double security for rights.
That's his term, yeah. Power is divided horizontally between branches and vertically between the federal and state governments. 2 layers of protection.
Madison also had strong views on reason versus passion in governing, right? Federalist 49.
He did. He believed, fundamentally, that it is the reason of the public alone that ought to control and regulate the government. The passions ought to be controlled and regulated by the government.
So government should reflect public reason, but dampen public passion. How does that work?
Well, he argued against having frequent popular votes or conventions to settle constitutional disputes. He worried that would stir up public passions, potentially lead to impulsive changes, undermine respect for the government, and maybe even let the legislature dominate because it's closest to those popular waves.
Interesting. It's a bit counterintuitive today, maybe. We often think more direct democracy is always better.
Madison was more cautious. He wanted stability and reasoned deliberation. For him, ultimately, justice is the end of government, the whole point. And he believes that Republican government couldn't work unless you assumed some degree of virtue in people.
Okay, let's shift from the big ideas to how they actually design the specific branches, starting with Congress, the legislative branch, and the House of Representatives first.
Right. The House was meant to be the branch closest to the people, directly elected, shorter terms,
How short?
2 years,
Yeah.
biennial elections. The idea was to keep representatives closely tied to their constituents' interests and ensure accountability.
And who could vote for them?
The qualifications were basically the same as whatever each state used for its own lower house elections. That kept things consistent.
And the size. Did they worry about it being too small or too big?
Initially, it was set at 65 members. The plan was for it to grow with the population, based on a census. The target was roughly 1 representative per 30,000 people, though that ratio has obviously changed massively over time.
And this is where we also encounter the difficult issue of the 3/5 clause, right, in Federalist 54.
Yes, a really complex and troubling part of the original design. Madison addresses the paradox: how could enslaved people be counted as persons for deciding how many representatives a state gets, but also considered property for things like taxation?
A compromise born from the reality of slavery at the time.
A deeply fraught compromise, yes. It highlights the moral contradictions embedded in the founding.
Okay, now moving to the other chamber, at the Senate. Very different design.
Very different purpose, too. 2 senators per state, regardless of population size. That was a key compromise between large and small states. And initially, they were chosen by state legislatures, not direct popular vote.
Why that structure? What was the Senate for?
Madison, in Federalist 62, saw its main role as providing stability. It was meant to be a check on the potentially more impulsive House, which might be swayed by immediate popular passions.
And the longer terms helped with that.
Yep.
6 years, right?
Exactly. Federalist 63 argues those longer 6-year terms were crucial. They'd allow senators to develop expertise, focus on long-term issues, provide consistency, especially in foreign policy, and act as a brake on what Madison called popular delusion.
Insulating them a bit from temporary public opinion shifts.
Right. He actually warned that too many elections could make officials less responsible, always just focused on the next campaign rather than sound governance. The Senate was meant to foster a national character and take the long view.
Okay, let's pivot to the executive branch. Hamilton had a lot to say here, starting even with the vice presidency in Federalist 68.
Yeah, Hamilton argued the VP should be chosen in a similar way to the president through the Electoral College system or by the Senate if the Electoral College didn't produce a majority, not direct popular vote.
Why not?
He wanted leaders chosen by those with supposedly more information and judgment, ensuring competence and unity at the top. It reflects his general preference for a more filtered democracy, especially for the executive.
And that leads to his big push for an energetic executive in Federalist 70. What did energy mean to him in this context?
It meant the ability to act decisively, swiftly, and effectively. Hamilton argued this energy was essential for national security, protecting against foreign threats and internal unrest, and for actually enforcing the laws Congress passed.
So the opposite of the weak Articles of Confederation.
Precisely. He identified 4 key ingredients for this energy.
Yeah.
Unity, meaning a single president, not a council.
Why was unity so important?
He argued a plural executive leads to disagreement, delays, makes it hard to hold anyone accountable. Division of blame, he called it. One person in charge means clear responsibility.
Okay, so unity. What were the other ingredients?
Duration, a long enough term in office. Adequate support, meaning salary and resources. And competent powers having the actual authority needed to do the job.
And the veto power fits into those competent powers. Federalist 73.
Yes. Hamilton saw the veto not primarily as a way for the president to make law, but as a defensive tool, a shield, he called it, against the legislature passing bad laws or encroaching on executive functions. It was about self-preservation for the branch.
The term length 4 years was also part of ensuring energy and independence. Federalist 71.
Right. Hamilton argued 4 years was long enough to allow a president to act with personal firmness, to resist pressure from Congress or temporary shifts in public mood, and to actually see policies through. He worried shorter terms would lead to servile pliancy, just trying to please everyone constantly.
And should the president be allowed to run again? Re-eligibility.
Hamilton strongly argued for re-eligibility in Federalist 72. His thinking was, first, it gives presidents an incentive to do a good job, hoping to be reelected. Second, it allows the public to keep experienced, effective leaders in office. And third, knowing your term is limited might tempt a president towards corruption or inaction near the end.
Interesting arguments against term limits, essentially.
Very much so. He saw more downsides than upsides to forcing a president out after one term.
What about interacting with other branches, treaties, for example? Federalist 75.
That was designed as a shared power. The president negotiates treaties, but they need the advice and consent of two-thirds of the Senate. It balances the need for executive speed and secrecy in diplomacy with the Senate's role in deliberation and representing the states.
And appointing officials, judges, ambassadors, cabinet members, Federalist 76.
Similar logic. The president nominates, but the Senate must confirm. Hamilton saw this as blending the president's individual responsibility in choosing someone with the Senate's collective wisdom in judging their fitness, a check to prevent cronyism, ideally.
Okay, finally, let's turn to the judicial branch, another area where Hamilton's vision was really central. Federalist 78 is huge here, right? Judicial review.
Absolutely huge. Hamilton makes the case that the courts must have the power to declare laws passed by Congress unconstitutional if they conflict with the Constitution. He called this power essential for maintaining a limited Constitution.
Now, does that mean the courts are superior to Congress?
Hamilton explicitly says no. It doesn't imply judicial supremacy over the legislative branch. Rather, it means the Constitution is supreme over both. The courts are just the interpreters, ensuring the legislature acts within its constitutional bounds.
And how do you ensure judges can do that impartially?
Lifetime tenure. Appointing judges during good behavior was crucial for Hamilton. It frees them from political pressure, from worrying about re-election or pleasing the current majority. This independence allows them to be guardians of the Constitution and individual rights, even against popular opinion or legislative overreach.
What kind of cases did they envision the federal courts handling Federalist 80?
It covered cases arising under the Constitution, federal laws, and treaties. Also, cases involving foreign diplomats, maritime issues, disputes between states, or between a state and citizens of another state, basically. Situations where a state court might be biased or where national uniformity was needed.
How did federal courts interact with state courts? Federalist 82.
Hamilton outlined a system where state courts would still hear many types of cases. He talked about concurrent jurisdiction, meaning both federal and state courts might be able to hear a case, unless the Constitution specifically gave exclusive power to federal courts. And importantly, decisions from state courts involving federal law could be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Creating a path for consistency.
Exactly. Ensuring the Constitution meant the same thing everywhere.
Now, we get to probably the most counterintuitive argument for many people today, Federalist 84, where Hamilton argues against adding a Bill of Rights.
Yeah, it's surprising, especially since the lack of one was a major anti-federalist complaint.
What was his reasoning? Why not list out the people's rights?
He had several arguments. First, he said it was unnecessary in a government like this, based on popular sovereignty, where the people theoretically give power to the government rather than the other way around. The government only has the powers it's explicitly granted.
Okay. What else?
He worried about the danger of enumeration, meaning if you list specific rights, does that imply that any right not listed isn't protected? Could
Right.
government then claim power over those unlisted areas?
A potential loophole.
That was his fear. He also argued that bills of rights historically came about as agreements between kings and their subjects, limiting the ruler. Here, the people were the ultimate rulers.
So context matters.
Right. And finally, he pointed out that the Constitution already contains specific protections, like the ban on ex post facto laws, the guarantee of habeas corpus. He felt those existing clauses were sufficient safeguards.
Of course, we know how that debate ended. A Bill of Rights was added pretty quickly after ratification. But Hamilton's arguments are still fascinating.
They really are. They force you to think about how rights are best protected.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, journeying through these arguments from Hamilton, Madison, and Jay. It's clear they were trying to build something complex, something balanced strong enough to work, but limited enough to stay free. Taming factions, creating energy in the executive, ensuring judicial independence.
Yeah, their insights, whether you agree with all of them or not, undeniably shaped American government and, really, continue to shape the debates we have today.
And if we circle back to that initial idea from Hamilton in Federalist Number 1, this whole endeavor was an act of reflection and choice, a deliberate attempt to design a government based on reason.
It really was. They truly believed the American experiment wasn't just for America, but a test case for self-government everywhere.
So thinking about that framework, that idea of needing reflection and choice to tackle big challenges instead of just letting things happen through accident and force,
Right.
what issue facing us today, politically or societally, do you think most urgently needs that kind of deep, deliberate thought and choice right now?